Greetings and welcome to the Elephant TV. My name is Joe Kobuthi. Today I'll be speaking to Dr. Ngala Chome. Dr. Ngala is a historian, an academic, researcher and writer based here in Nairobi, Kenya. Karibu Ngala to the Elephant.
Asante, Joe.
Asante sana. I'd like us to just kick this conversation off with a small, just to contextualize this conversation. Of course, I mean now it's out in the open about the BBI ruling of the High Court. The repeal is going on, but certain thing that struck me, and I think many other Kenyans reading the High Court judgment was really the manner in which the High Court castigated the proponents of the BBI and the BBI process on how cavalier it was undertaken, how, to quote the Kenyan adage, mtadu kind of spirit of how the whole thing was done, by a few members of the political class and use state machinery, etc. So my question, to you, Ngala, is how did we get here with a political class that is, in a sense, a very, very cavalier and very, do kind of thing towards judicial processes, the rule of law, the state, the Kenyans. And historically, have you been here before?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me again on this discussion series on the elephant, which I think very important to give historical perspective, deep analysis to what is happening in the country in the run-up to the next elections in 2022.
Precisely.
To answer your question, I think that when we were discussing this a few weeks ago, is that yes, this kind of logic has been there before, and usually I like to start off with sort of like the original scene of the Kenyan state itself. The Kenyan state is a post-colonial state. And it has always been argued that it was not fundamentally reformed at independence in 1963, so that the logic of governance during the colonial period is the logic of governance that continued in the post-colonial period, which is to say that Kenya began life as a heavily administrative colony, where a few individuals, in this case, colonial administrators, had the power to decide the ongoings around the territory in terms of economy, the society, and also laws, and that then led to a very centralized political system, with all administrative, economic, and political power concentrated in Nairobi, and set of government that was headquartered in Nairobi. And this is the kind of institutional landscape in which Kenya became independent in 1963.
Right.
Now, even though we became independent with a constitution that actually was designed to restructure that system in terms of decentralizing serious powers and functions of government from Nairobi away from Nairobi to 8 regions, in this case, majimbos. By 1964, that centralized system had reorganized itself. In fact, now even under a very powerful executive president, in this case, Jomo Kenyatta, and therefore for the next 20 years or so, Kenya, underwent through an elite consensus of domination, where a few elites elected from different districts during that time surrounded Jomo Kenyatta at the center, and it was through these individuals that the state was legitimated across the territory,
Right.
And therefore a number of processes like the edification of Kenyatta as the Baba wa Taifa, all these kind of things, all these kind of processes ensured that that a small elite will dominate the rest of the population and keep inequalities and serious questions that were asked during the 50s, during the independence movement, were not asked during the 1970s. But of course, we know that this system will collapse, especially during the Moi regime. There'll be serious fragmentation at the center, which then opens up the multi-party, the return of multi-party politics chapter in the 1990s. And of course, we know that that chapter was also associated with a lot of violence. That violence, of course, is a direct result of the fragmentation of the elites at the center that took place during the Moi regime. So they sort of brief union, especially of Kikuyu and Luo political elites, that removes KANU from power in 2002. But even that, I call it brief because by 2005 there's already disagreements around what the new constitution should look like. In this case, the Bomas draft.
Precisely.
And therefore, I'm talking about the rift between LDP, which was the party under the leadership of Raila Odinga, and National Alliance of Kenya, NAK, which was in the leadership of Mwai Kibaki, who was then the president. These parties, of course, we know, had formed a coalition named the National Rebel Coalition, or NARC, NARC. And therefore, fragmentation is again caused or happens in the NARC coalition, at the center of which was a new constitutional draft, the Bomas draft, which then later became the Wako draft, after it had been quote unquote mutilated by the then Attorney General Amos Wako, for the very same purposes of re-centralizing power at the center. So these have been historical cycles that was kind of happening again in 2005. And therefore, with that debate and with that disagreement, the seeds of the 2007 post-election violence were planted. So then we go to violence 2007, and there we see actually the risks of serious fragmentation at the center of elite fragmentation. That if that is not checked, then we might even lose the country. It is under this context that the new Constitution 2010 came to be, after searching for a new constitution for about 20 years. Now, there is something I have to say here, that first and foremost, I think that what we are now facing going towards 2022 is a serious generational, it's a crisis of generational transition in our politics. In this way, one, the most important political players at this, today, we're talking about Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, are directly descendant from the political elite of the 60s. Uhuru's father being the first president and Raila Odinga's father being the first vice president. The 50s and 60s are a very important period in our political history and our political development. It is a time when those political elites that came to dominate Kenyan politics for the next 50 years were able to gain control over the means of production, in this case, land, labor, and capital, but also the power, even institutionally, the power to reproduce themselves. They gained that during the 1950s, 1960s. And it has been the most durable political elite, actually, when you look at developments throughout the continent in Africa.
Right.
The Kenyan political elite has been the most durable political elite that has stayed in power for the longest period of time. In many African states, went through military coups in 60s and 70s. So there was a lot of change. But in Kenya, you see a very durable political elite that's actually still in power at this point. The only episode in our history, in our political history, that threatened to remove this political elite that had gained power in the 50s and 60s is during the Moi regime. It is during the Moi regime, even though he tried so hard was not able to remove them. But it was during that time that the political elite that had gained power in the 60s was really threatened, or their position was actually really threatened. But also what happens during the Moi regime, you're talking about 80s, 90s, is something very interesting. Moi, we usually are very mute as historians about when it comes to this legacy of the Moi regime, is that he actually really redistributed authority, power, and resources away from the regions that had been favored by not only by the colonial state, but also by Jomo Kenyatta. For example, the opening of Moi University in Eldoret, the opening, yes, exactly. So this kind of redistributing, opening Nyayo T-zones, bringing people from his backyard into serious positions of authority and power in government, reformulating what was the old KADU alliance, bringing people from areas such as Western Kenya, the coast, into the center of government, people like Sharif Nasir, people like Mudavadi, the father of Musalia Mudavadi. Bringing people from Mukambani, for example, Mulu Mutisia, and then Kalonzo Musyoka after that. It was a way in which Moi was really trying to refocus attention from central Kenya and the highlands. That had been the focus of the political economy of the country. It is Moi, for example, was the first president in Kenya to appoint a Somali minister. This is also very, very important to kind of remember. So part of that process, especially by the 1990s, when the country is really informalizing, but not only Kenya, but throughout the world. This is the time of Bretton Woods institutions taking hold of our economy, asking the state to get out of the economy, liberalizing the economy, liberalizing politics, and which then leads to a lot of informalization. This is the time where we see an emergence much later of a younger, more entrepreneurial class of people, whose main difference from the younger generation that took power in the 50s and 60s from the colonialists was that they were really brought and bred in Kenya, through the struggles that the country was going through at that time. These were not necessarily English-speaking elites. These were not necessarily university-educated elites, but people who had learned the system, what were hustle, as we said. This is really where the hustler generation is becoming crafted in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Right.
People like the Sonkos, people like Hassan Johos,
the KJs,
the people around YK92. We're talking about, and they are, they're on record by saying that YK92 was originally a group of 28 young business people in the 1990s. All these people had learned the system, had gotten some contracts here and there. They were very different in character from the elite that had taken power in the 50s and 60s, which was becoming old in the 90s, right?
Right.
The Mwai Kibakis and the John Michukis, they were a bit different from that. And from this generation that I'm talking about, William Ruto comes from this generation, right?
Right.
So what happens is that because also, despite them being different in character and form from the older elite, they did not, or were not really proposing a serious transformation of this country's politics. They were not proposing a socialist trajectory, for example. They were really capitalists themselves, and that's the real contribution, if you like, that they were promising, is that they also wanted a piece of the pie. They also wanted to be involved in politics, to be involved in decision making in the country. But they will begin to make this claim much, much later, I think is what we are seeing now. Before that happens is that they were also used, this new generation of entrepreneurial space, of entrepreneurial elites, were really at the service of the older political elite. Right. In some way or another, William Ruto has always repeated this claim, for example, in political meetings that, he's the one who supported Uhuru Kenyatta, for example, until the last day in 2002 when he was defeated by Mwai Kibaki. William Ruto then repeats that he really supported Raila Odinga, within ODM.
Yeah.
In 2007, I think that leads, Raila Odinga to becoming the prime minister. And we can talk about many other people, including the Sonkos, who at one point or another, Hassan Joho, who at one point or another were very, very crucial for the continued dominance of the older elite in our politics until very recently. So I think until the handshake happened and the BBI process was unleashed, this is when now we are beginning to see that generation has become tired of being used, and they are also now on the door and they are knocking and they're saying, even us, we want to be involved in the governance of this country. And this, I think, is at the heart of what we now call the hustler movement.
Right. Just even to carry on this conversation around the hustler movement, because the hustler movement in many regards has also stoked the aspirations and hopes and dreams of the youth in this country, because you're having, in a country that has less than 1 million graduates, less than 15 million people who are employed both formally and informally, but having a steady income. There's a huge swath of the population that is really enamored by this new kind of politics of the nation and etc. But my question would be, what was it about the Katiba 2010 that has also enabled this carefully, let me call it carefully, emerging new kind of politics to start emerge from the peripheries? What is it about the Katiba 2010 and that has allowed this new kind of politics to start emerging?
So I'll combine the answer to your question to a question that you had asked earlier, and I don't think I answered. So I have argued elsewhere that the Kenyan 2010 Constitution was birthed by a context where elites in Kenya were very distrustful of each other. This, we had just come out of a post-election violence, 2007, and the political elite was quickly trying to reformulate the new rules of the game, so to speak. But while doing that, seriously distrusting, not trusting each other. And this process is, when I talk about lack of trust, it was very clear. If you look at what, for example, happened in Naivasha in late 2009, when the harmonized draft, then prepared by the committee of experts, was presented to the Parliamentary Select Committee of 14 PNU members, the party of Mwai Kibaki, and I think 13 ODM members, the party of Raila Odinga. Because there was fear that the political elite may sabotage or may drag the process of looking for a new constitution, the guardrails for changing this constitution, but also for altering that process in itself, the way Bomas was hijacked, were put very high. So that by the time that the committee of experts had collected views from Kenyans and had combined a number of constitutional drafts before, including Bomas, to produce a harmonized draft, it was very, very difficult then legally to change that document. And in fact, no single amendment passed through Parliament after the diversion deliberations in late 2009. And therefore, we passed a constitution, basically, that was wholly written by people who are outside of parliament, people who are outside of the political elite for the first time. And that became our new constitution, right? Extensive provisions in terms of Bill of Rights, and very clear in terms of a separation of powers between the three arms of government, judiciary, parliament, and the executive. And very clear also in terms of the functions of the national government, the functions of county governments, and the provisions around devolution. It even went ahead and spoke a bit about the ethics that are required, ethics that are required of a leader. Yes, and generally it promoted a language of public consultation, of participation in the governance process, in the development process, the respect of cultures, right? Basically, just the respect of the public voice.
Right.
All this was a new kind of language in terms of legal constitutional development that was brought in by the new constitution. But that, again, I'm saying was possible because the political context at the time in which the new constitution was being passed was a political context of serious lack of trust between the political elite. So they did not have time to actually ensure that the constitution, but the draft that becomes the constitution is a constitution that will pay heed to the interest of the elite. They didn't have time for that because they were seriously trying to fix each other using the constitution, and in the end, passed a constitution that actually had seriously curtailed, if you like, or changed the way in which power would be exercised compared to the previous or the retired constitution. So two things. One, what is it about this new constitution that has sort of, let me say, promoted this kind of hustler narrative, which is distinctively youth-led, I have to say, and seeks a sort of change of the guard or change of the elite. It is precisely because of that. I mean, I've been paying attention to what has been happening across the country since this new constitution was passed in 2010, in terms of just what the constitution was doing, in terms of how it was changing activism, in terms of how it was changing people's participation in public affairs.
Right.
In a place like Lamu, for example, the new constitution was very pivotal, or it informed, for example, the formation of a local community-based organization, or that was an umbrella body actually of many organizations in Lamu called Save Lamu, that was not formed to oppose the LAPSET project or the construction of a port in Lamu, but to seek the public's participation in that process, for example. So they quoted a number of articles in the new constitution that, for them, according to them, allowed them to sort of organize in that way and to seek this public consultation in that manner. And they actually used the new constitution as well, and the language of rights that the new constitution had promoted, to take the government to court and actually win a case, and even also sort of leveraged that success to also oppose the construction or the proposed construction of a coal power plant, which was going to be next to the new port in Manda Bay. All this is possible because of what the new constitution had done, for example. Right. And there are so many examples of that nature, where people now are beginning to use the courts, the judiciary, the law, to petition certain key aspects of governance in the country. So across the LAPSET corridor, for example, you'd see an emergence of organizations that will really use the law to petition certain processes of governance. I'm talking about Friends of Lake Turkana, the Serima Indigenous Peoples Movement. All these organizations in far-flung or what we formerly referred to as neglected regions of Kenya,
right.
Using this new constitution to petition key aspects of governance that affected their lives. This was an immediate, for me, this was like an immediate kind of impact, if you like, of how this new constitution was changing politics in the country.
Right.
Which is like saying that by constricting the powers of the executive is now meant to consult with many different kind of players in the governance process in a way that Mwai Kibaki or Moi or Kenyatta was not required to do.
Right.
It is that restricting of the powers of the executive that has led to this kind of emergence, if you like, of a sort of alternative force that is claiming also some space in the center of our country's politics. And this, of course, I think is well represented by the Hustler movement.
So I mean,
I feel sorry, yeah.
No. So I mean, so does the Hustler movement is it an indicator of a new kind of politics that is emerging in our society?
Yes. So there are two things. There's a struggle here.
Right.
And like I said, the struggle is generational. So you have a generation of elites, and like I said, directly descended from an elite of the 50s and 60s, the elite that took power from the colonialists, that was so used to ruling the country in a sort of boardroom-like way, which is decisions are made in a small room in Nairobi, and they immediately permeate the rest of the society, especially through the formerly powerful provincial administration.
Precisely.
Yeah. So Kenya and and I think I also had Dr. David Lee talk about this. You have a cabal of elites in Kenya that still believe that less than 50 people can control events throughout the territory, from land, from security, from resource governance, all those areas, right? That they have the technical and the political ability to determine the fate of the rest of the country. That is how Kenya was run during the colonial period. That is how Kenya was run until 1990. That system has begun to falter, and the process that has led to that has speeded up that process is elite fragmentation. It's a fragmentation of the elite. If the elite cannot agree on the rules of the game, it then becomes very difficult for a few of them to decide events across the territory. And this is what has been happening since the 1990s. Actually, if one is to summarize Kenyan politics since the 1990s, it is basically a story of elites always trying to look for rules of the game that all of them can agree with, and they have not been able to do that, right? Because they seriously don't trust each other. Now, BBI comes to be in this manner. Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga thinking that just because you have shaken hands, you will be able to rope in most of the country, and that the country will follow you, so that the law does not even really matter in this case. What matters is those personalities and what they wish. And therefore their constituencies, in this case, the ethnic constituencies, will rally behind them. And even the constitution does not matter, right? They have been proved fatally wrong. It's almost as if saying that while the country has changed, the political elite has not. And they still want to rule the country in the way in which the country was ruled in the 60s and 70s. And this is proving to be very, very difficult. And that's how, then, to answer your question, this Hustler movement is representing a real challenge to a very traditional way of domination in this country and of governance in this country.
Right. And then, I mean, rightly so. I mean, you talk about two forces, the Hustler nation, which you correctly paint its history, from the SARS generation to what Pastor Kantai, the writer, calls the ridiculous generation, the generation that comes out of through the struggle and through the hustle. And then it's this contestation of this emerging elite that is also generational, with the old, in a sense, the old Lancaster respectability boardroom, groomed out of, the colonial experience of, very British, British high uppity kind of politics. But then the question, and you're having these two forces, but then the question would be, because where do we go in terms of new ways of civic organizing for the people? Because in this conversation, we're talking about two factions of elite. Where do the people come in, and when they come in, what are some of the nodes that you've seen in terms of organizing and thinking that civic society and civil society traditionally should start thinking about moving towards, in terms of, even as this new dispensation is emerging?
Well, so we've basically been doing analysis of the country's politics so far. But if you talk about interventions or how people should intervene, I mean, okay, fine. So one is that I don't know where this hustler thing is going to go. I don't know how far it's going to go in terms of changing our politics. I don't know. We are yet to see. Initially, it was being discussed. Some people were throwing class analysis onto it initially. And I remember hearing someone like Alonso Musyoka saying that William Ruto is trying to unleash a class war. I will not be that I will not be that certain that class
is an accurate
has really become the dominant. I'm not sure that class has really become the dominant form of political mobilization in Kenya through the hustler narrative, right? The hustler narrative is basically, I think for me, has gained traction, if it has, through something I told you before, this idea of the politics of Madarao. And I'll explain. So the thing about it, even in 2007, the politics of Madarao was very powerful. The idea that people felt left out of not only the political process, but also the economy. And you're talking about large swaths of the country having that emotion, right? The only difference is that it was expressed through ethnic frameworks or expressed through ethnic lenses. But the real emotion at the heart of the PV and now at the heart of the hustler movement is the idea that many people in this country are feeling the basic, so wanaona wamedharauliwa by the political elite, that they don't matter, that their voice does not matter, and that also what they do productively does not matter for the economy. The economy is being set up for high capital. The economy is being set up for large investors. When you're talking about infrastructure development being the key development plank of this regime, it is all meant for high investors, international investors. It's not meant for small-scale farmers. It is not meant for small-scale traders. It is not meant for actually people who make up about 80%, 85% of this economy, right? So, and this is the reaction. So it's people feeling that, high-level capitalist elitists and policies, right, have been dominating this regime and have neglected them, right? So it is not that people want a socialist revolution per se, but is that people want to feel that the economy works for them and that decisions are being made to benefit them, and they're not feeling that. And I think William Ruto is really kind of cultivating that sense of exclusion that a large part of this country feels, in particular, even in central Kenya itself. A lot of analysis has been issued that the recent result of the Kiambaa by-election is driven by that feeling in itself, that despite having a president from their region, people have felt excluded from the political process, in this case BBI and the economy. So I think that is a crucial aspect to pay attention to, that this is not necessarily an evolution of a class-based politics, Um, 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 but it's sort of more emotional than that. That people feel that this political elite that has dominated the country since the 1950s, 1960s needs to go, but it needs to go because it has neglected them, and it has wamedharauliwa basically. That feeling of madarau it has political capital is what I'm trying to say here. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just to completely correct, in Kiamba, about 200 families own 80% of the land, and the rest, 20% of the land is occupied by 200 to 250,000 families, according to statistics. But just coming into this idea of politics of Madarao, and this rejection of your rejection of this the Lancaster elite, if you may call them that. This elite are the ones who curated the independence project. It was in 1963 in Jomo Kenyatta's speech. He came up and said, we're going to eradicate poverty, disease and ignorance, and dignity for all people, and land justice, and all these other things. So So what are these contestation and this transition we're seeing? What does it mean for not just the independence project, but also even for the institutions that were created to make this independence project a reality?
I think that it's something that I've already kind of intimated that. So the new constitution, 2010, or I should stop calling it the new constitution. It's 11 years old now. The 2010 constitution,
right,
has seriously altered that institutional landscape that was curated by the Lancaster elite.
Right.
I think for us, the judiciary is the one institution that has shown us that things have really changed.
Absolutely.
When the constitution was passed in 2010, I am one of those people who was actually a little bit concerned that we've not really changed anything. You know, that the president continues to hold a lot of power, and that through the political party he may also control and dominate parliament. You know, right. The legislative wing of government. So actually, I think it's only the judiciary that has shown us, not just through the BBI judgment, but also, like I was mentioning, through the developments that have been happening since 2010, where people have been taking to court the government on various issues. The examples I was giving across the Lapset corridor and in Lamu, for example, this has been happening. The BBI judgment, because it has garnered a lot of attention, maybe this is when a lot of people are talking about what has the Kenyan 2010 constitution done to the arrangement of power in this country. But it was already rearranging power anyway since 2010, and people were using it to petition, to challenge, to reject even some proposals that were coming from the government. And they've been successful in doing so. And I was hearing, for example, CS Fred Matiang'i the other day saying that a lot of government projects have stalled because of litigation. But that for me is to say that the law is really working, and the law is really pushing back on the powers of the executive. So because the power of the Lancaster elite was rested on controlling the executive branch of government, and through it, the bureaucracy and the provincial administration, that was where the real power was. We are seeing that power is slowly dispersing itself through the Kenyan 2010 constitution. So that is what I say is one of the most serious structural changes that have happened in Kenyan post-colonial politics that are really beginning to threaten the position of the Lancaster elite. That, in addition to now the emergence of the hustler generation, which, like I've said, can be traced to the 1990s, the time of informalization during the Moi regime. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so lastly, before we wind up, then, for the youth in Kenya, because there's all these new contestations, distribution of power, but as yet, if statistics are to be believed, we're still facing aggressive unemployment. So my question as an intervention to you as a parting shot, where do the youth find themselves in this new contestation? And where do they need to start plugging in terms of civil organizing, political organizing, for people such that this contestation works for them?
Yeah. I'm surprised that I'm the one who will say this, but I think that the Kenyan youth may want to look across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, and borrow a leaf, not entirely, of how the youth in the West has been politicized in the last decade or so. I think for me, it's a very incredible phenomena that has been happening there in the West. That powerful individuals have been brought down for misbehaving by hashtags, for example. And we are seeing that the generation for someone like me, for example, the generation that was only important when it comes to music and entertainment and fashion, not the generation, but people for us who are only important when it comes to music, generation, and fashion, have become distinctly politicized over the last decade.
Right.
Very extremely young people, 19, 20, just coming out of high school and into college, trying to comment and to act on the world, on very serious political questions of the world. So I think that for Kenya, there are many questions that need addressing. Of course, we also need to unpack this idea of the youth. It is we have different types of youth, of young people,
right.
But also that is not to say that there are no commonalities across this category, right?
Right.
In particular, in the way in which our country's politics has affected the youth, it has affected them in very similar ways. In this case, when you're talking about unemployment, when you're talking about poverty, you find that sometimes it is even across classes. Children from well-to-do families and children from poor families, you'd find that they're both usually unemployed and jobless. That means for me, it means that there's a serious crisis of transition. That if the means of production are still being dominated by an old political elite, it will always create stagnation. It will always mean that a new generation may not rise up, may not come to replace them in business, in industry, and not just in employment, right?
Right.
So I think that in terms of organizing, again, like I said, people should look further ahead and learn. But this model that was available to us and still is of forming community-based organizations and looking for funding from Western donors, I think that model needs to be rethought. One way in which now activism has been very powerful is, for example, through social media and through the use of digital technology. And young people have been very effective users of digital technology to project their voice, whether it's a commentary about issues that young people grapple with, from unemployment to reproduction, to sexual reproduction, to romance and love and identity. It is those similar platforms that young people should now begin to curate and ask serious questions about the politics of the country,
right,
and how young people should mobilize and project their voice into the politics of the country. Now, when I said that, I'm really personally, I'm really invested and interested in seeing that young people in Kenya have power, and power with a capital P, is that it's not this involvement of young people that you have always been seeing, which is to have them write political songs for ODM or for NASA or for whatever, or for Jubilee, and show up in political rallies. No, but actually young people presenting themselves for office, running for office, petitioning the government in serious questions of governance through court cases, through writing in the media platforms such as The Elephant. This is what I'm talking about. So the formation of organizations and that will run in terms of like Western funding will not be enough if more young people are to be involved in the political process. I think that organizing in these kind of digital publics around Twitter, around Facebook, but also in the streets is very important to begin to mobilize and to project the voice of the young people in public so that we are heard. But also like really thinking about shifting attitudes in ways in which this country's politics has been running. Young people need to bring fresh ideas, and the only way to do that is through this sort of digital organizing that then begins to have an impact on what we're actually seeing on the streets.
Dr. Ngala, I mean, we leave it at that. Thank you so much for giving us your time here at The Elephant.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much. And
always a pleasure.
Great. Yeah. And for viewers, be sure to subscribe, like, and follow us on our channels on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you so much, and asanteni sana.